Hello, Year 13. Right, it is me. I'm making you this little film about how to plan successful essays, just in case you get bored over the Christmas holidays and miss my constant droning on. You'll be able to play this film, and it will help you. I've got a bit of a cough, which I will try and manage as I prepare this resource for you. This Christmas special. Okay, enough. You've got a title. You should have. What do you do now? How do you actually plan through your essay and get it sorted? If we imagine our title is How Valid is the View that Donne presents women as submissive rather than as equal and empowered into mistress going to bed, really you need to then just explore this title. And we talked in the lesson about not thinking you're going to jump straight to your answer in it for it to just emerge fully formed out of your head immediately. There's an element of struggle, an element of creativity and thinking and reading the poems before you might get decide on what you're going to say. So my point is planning is a bit of a slow process sometimes, but that's okay. In this instance, we're looking at submissiveness, equality, and empowerment being our key drivers for this essay. What you need to do then is go, as I said, I'm just repeating myself here really, but go to the text, find the answers in the text. Decide what your favourite quotes are, what quotes seem most appropriate, read the poems again, think about the poems again, go back to the anthology and think what you're going to say from a feminist perspective, read around that a little bit. Bear in mind, if you're choosing about 4 points in total, one of them is likely to be about structure. We advise you to make one of your points explicitly about structure, so you're hitting that criteria. It's very likely that another one's going to be about metaphysical conceits, because it's so central to Donne. Most people do focus one of their paragraphs on that idea. I'm not saying you absolutely have to, but it hits the criteria about language. Right, here's here we go. Here's the process. Okay, for each paragraph, each point, what is your main point and how does it answer your question? And use that to form your topic sentence. So decide what is your answer to the question. Make sure you've got a quotation that links to your point and go for the quotation. Analyze it in depth, really think it through. Then go to the critical perspective, use your anthology. What might a feminist critic say about this? What quotes can you bring in that might help you? And then historical context points that link to the quotation. What is the most appropriate context of reception or context of production that links here? So it might be historical, it might be a modern point as well, if it's talking about how a modern audience might receive. But basically what I'm saying there is the 4 assessment objectives. I'll show you what I mean. So if you're making a point, Donne's use of metaphysical conceit exposes his view of women as objects to be owned and dominated. Right, so there's a topic sentence which links to your title, because it's about submission and domination. You notice you don't have to keep using exactly the same words, but it's linked enough to make sense. You've then got the quote, "Oh, my America, my Newfoundland," and then you think through what you're going to say about that quote. It's possessive, it's exclamatory. The O seems like a climactic moment in the poem, which is talk about structure, which is good. There's a metaphor of dominance and ownership. The idea about he's sort of conquering the land. My America is possessive. So you're choosing an example of metaphysical conceit which does this, which exposes his view of women as objects to be owned, and analysing it, really thinking carefully about it. Then you're thinking, well, what was our next thing? It was about critical perspectives. Now, Alona Bell has written an article which I'm giving you today, actually, so you wouldn't have seen yet. But she writes about how it reflects views of women at the time. I'll make that clear in a second. And then finally, the idea of Puritans, colonization, thinking then through about, well, what did America mean? How do you link, what contextual information is useful to link to America? So then you think about the colonization of America, which was happening at that time. And if you don't know enough about that, you find out about it. You see what I mean? So 1, 2, 3, 4, and of course they just sort of relate to the different assessment objectives. So sharp focus on task, use of quotations, interpretation. You've got the critical, looking at text from critical points of view, and you've got the context point here. So each of the assessment objectives is covered in that paragraph. And then you end up with something like this. So let's just dwell on this paragraph for a moment. Donne's use of metaphysical conceit exposes his view of women as objects to be owned and conquered. Okay. He likens his seduction of her to the discovery of America. Oh, my America, my newfound land. This metaphysical conceit, okay, shows the triumph of the speaker's sexual conquest, highlighting his possessiveness of her body as his land. This ownership is emphasized by the repetition of my and the exclamatory O, and exclaim. So this really should be a single O, shouldn't have the H there. The reference to his mistress as newfound land suggests the speaker is the ruler of her body, yet on the other hand, it may be interpreted that without his kingdom, the man is nothing. So there's an element of debate there. This can be seen as an equal power balance, as they are both at a loss without one another. Okay, so really, this is good stuff. And I'm not saying by using this structure, you need to be really stuck to one sentence here, one sentence here, one sentence here, one sentence here, or that you need to do it in this order all the time. Absolutely not. The best essays are, creative and not necessarily just ploughing through the same formula for every paragraph. We see a bit of that here. However, the women's passivity and silence is notable. The stereotype of a beautiful yet dominated woman, seemingly incapable of making herself heard, supports the interpretation of the metaphor. Perhaps it's more convincing to consider the poem as a reflection of its context. So bringing in context. Male domination was fundamental to Donne's poetic and cultural inheritance, and it's referenced. The poem displays the distribution of power in the 1600s, but does not necessarily portray it as an ideal situation. Okay, so it's discussing the context, isn't it? It's trying to say what's important about that context in the context of the when you're thinking about the answer to the question. One could also argue that the image of America as a newly discovered and exotic location offers an uplifting perspective on Donne's mistress. So you could argue that it's very complimentary that he's saying this about her. It's not she's not being submissive. He's kind of celebrating her and venerating her. This reflects contemporary ideas of the 17th century. At a time when many European Puritans emigrated to newfound American lands, they christened the new settlements as virgin lands. This reference to the woman as land demonstrates the male ownership he has over her. By using this conceit, he's essentially colonizing his new land by having sexual intercourse with her. So, it's a well-developed piece of writing, and this really is the sort of thing that you need to be aiming to be producing. Super stuff.